to the Money Mountaineering show hosted by Actuary Peter Neuwirth, FSA, FCA, who asked the question, what's your future worth? Of course, these are the titles of Pete's fascinating books. It's a pleasure to produce his show on the Incandescent Radio Network and Incandescent TV. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, and what it is a treat tonight to bring you episode 7 of his show starring best-selling author Annie Duke. Her new book is Quit: The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away. It was released in October 2022 from Portfolio, which is a Penguin Random House imprint. For 2 decades, Annie was one of the top poker players in the world. In 2004, she bested a field of 234 players to win her first World Series of Poker bracelet. The same year, she triumphed in the $2 million winner, take-all invitation-only WSOP Tournament of Champions, and in 2010, she won the prestigious NBC National Heads Up Poker Championship. She retired in 2012, and the rest is history. We are so excited to have you here. Annie, take it away, Pete.
Well, thanks a lot, Hope. And Annie, it's so great to see you. I mean, and we've had a few conversations over the last few months and maybe a couple of years, and you were kind enough to write the foreword to my book, and I really appreciate that. And so you've written a great book that I really want to talk about, and but I actually want to start out by just asking you, because my father taught me chess, and I'm a chess player.
Oh,
You're a poker player, and he always told me that resign is the weakest move. But I guess you disagree. And I'd love to hear why you think my father was wrong and what you've written about.
So resign is not the weakest move in a situation where the writing is on the wall, right? So we have to think about, even in a game like chess, and even however long the extra moves are, to actually end up having the fait accompli happen, right? Which is that you end up in checkmate. We need to think of our time, attention, resources, like effort, money.
Right.
We have to recognize that those are limited resources, and we want to be spending those resources on endeavors that are worthwhile, and not be spending them on endeavors that aren't worthwhile. So when we think about resigning, when does somebody resign? When they can see that the checkmate is there, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're actually in checkmate or not. If you can see that the path forward is checkmate, wouldn't you rather resign and then spend the time starting a new game?
Right.
No, and I think that it's such a great analogy for how we might think about how we allocate our attention and effort and time and money to the variety of things that we might do in our own lives. There's plenty of things that we do where we can see the checkmate on the horizon, and we ought not to continue until you're actually in checkmate before we're willing to walk away and go on to something that's actually going to cause us to gain more ground toward the goals that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of psychological barriers that get in the way of seeing that there's writing on the wall. And I mean, that's the wonderful thing about your book, is you talk about so many of those things. And among my favorites is the endowment effect. One of the stories in your book that I really related to was the one about Wilkinson, the guy who invented flow, and because his product was good and it was better than the competition. And why didn't that work? And why should he have quit sooner than he did?
So in Andrew Wilkinson's case, he was in some ways a serial entrepreneur. He actually had a company that also funded enterprises. And he was a huge to-do list fanatic. And he developed a product called Flow, which was a SaaS tool, a software as a service tool, just software tool that would help people with to-do lists. Okay, so he's developing this product. He loves it. He thinks it's really beautiful. And he's bootstrapping it. So he hasn't gotten venture money. He's actually using his own capital. He was a very successful businessman, entrepreneur, funder, angel investor, that kind of thing. So he loves it. He's funding it with his own money. So this is creating like tremendous ownership over this product. Well, it turned out that Dustin Moskovitz, formerly of Facebook, was also creating a to-do list product that was called Asana. And initially, like, he was a little worried because Moskovitz is a big name. He's got a lot of money. Asana is venture backed, whereas he's bootstrapping his product. But he sees the initial version of Asana and he's very relieved because it's like very ugly and it's clunky, and his tool is beautiful and amazing, and he just knows it's a better tool.
Right.
So he
right.
goes and has Moskovitz actually asked him to have a meeting. Moskovitz telling is that he was trying to see if there was some way that either they could merge, or that Asana, because it was venture backed, would be willing to acquire Flow. Wilkinson's interpretation of the meeting was different, as sort of a threat, like kind of a "we're going to eat you alive" kind of conversation. But the fact was that basically what Moskovitz was saying was, we have a lot of funding, we have lots and lots of money, probably that's going to give us a competitive advantage over you bootstrapping. Why don't we join forces, right, and try to defeat the big players in the world? But obviously that conversation didn't go well because they heard it differently. Well, Moskovitz goes off. They continue to develop Asana. They obviously have a lot of capital, and of course Asana ends up passing Flow in terms of its usefulness, like what its functionality is, its UX, that kind of stuff. But Wilkinson still absolutely refuses to stop developing Flow because he thinks it's amazing. Eventually, even though the writing is on the wall very early, probably back when this meeting occurred, he ends up putting, I think, $11 million of his own money in.
Right.
So this is coming from endowment. He owns his product. He thinks it's better than Asana. He values it more than Asana. He won't allow Asana to acquire him. He won't allow a merger because he doesn't feel like he's going to get what the product is worth, because he believes it's worth more than it actually is.
Right.
And this creates an error that causes him to lose a lot of money. I don't know
Right.
how much he had in it at the time that Moskovitz talked to him. It was probably very low seven figures, but he ends up with 11 million. He gets into the 8 figures in terms of what he's put into it before
Right.
eventually it sort of dies a slow death.
Isn't there something else going on there too, that Wilkinson believed he was right and he just wouldn't see the information that was out there, and he maybe he had tunnel vision, and so many. I mean, I find myself, if I think I'm right, it's very, very hard to convince me that I'm not, and I'm a little bit immune to this information. So it seems like there's information out there that we don't use when we decide we're right or on a path. And how do we get access to that information? How do we open our eyes to that information that's not obvious?
So I think you've hit on something really central, kind of the crux of the matter, which is, so we have the intuition. So when we think about, let me just back up. When we're thinking about decision making under uncertainty, right? I have to choose to start things. So I have to choose to develop Flow. I have to choose to start up Mount Everest. I have to choose to take a job or to hire an employee. So we can think about the variety of things that we have to choose to start. And when we choose to start those things, we're starting them under conditions of uncertainty. And we can think about, both, there's going to be an influence of luck on the way it turns out. And sometimes, maybe it's not going to work out 5% of the time, but you live the 5%. It's going to happen 5% of the time by definition. And then oftentimes it's also like we're having to make those decisions when we aren't omniscient. We don't know everything that there is to be known. And we've all had that feeling of, I wish I knew then what I know now. I would have made a different choice. And that sort of, we can feel sort of the uncertainty of the starting, really exposing itself in those moments where we say, "Oh, I learned new stuff. If I'd known it, I would have done something different." Okay. But it's the human condition that we have to start things when we don't have all the facts. We have to start things knowing that luck could go our way or not go our way. The beauty of this option to quit is that it's what allows us to deal with that new information when we find out that things aren't going our way. When we say, look, I thought when I started this, it would be worth it, but now standing where I am now, I realize that the path forward is no longer worth it.
Isn't it sometimes though, just the information itself that you're gathering is ambiguous, or it's noisy, or maybe it's, you don't believe it because perhaps somebody's lying to you. So isn't that also a problem these days in trying to figure out incomplete? I guess incomplete information comes in lots of different flavors, it seems.
Yeah. So let's just say, first of all, when we start things, we're willing to start things with very little knowledge. The problem is that once we stop, to get us to stop, basically, I think Richard Thaler said this, I like to repeat things that Nobel laureate said, but I think this is deeply insightful, that most of the time we won't quit until it's no longer a choice. So to your point, of course, look, when you're making a decision to quit, there's going to be uncertainty. There's going to be ambiguity in the sense of what your dad said, right? At the point that you resign, is it 100% certain that you're going to get checkmated? I suppose not. The person could have a stroke.
Right.
Right. Maybe they just make like a humongous blunder and somehow you end up winning. But the point to stop is when you figure out the expected value isn't there, meaning that the return on an investment is no longer there. And obviously that's always going to be a forecast. If you wait until you have 100% certainty before you're willing to walk away, you're already in checkmate. You've already fallen into the crevasse.
Right.
That is what they then believe.
So that's really, really compelling. I have, you mentioned expected value, and of course, expected value is near and dear to my heart as an actuary, and I'm trying to make all decisions based on expected value. And I thought there was a fascinating mention and I think it was one of the summary chapters where you said, if you do an expected value calculation and it's close, you're more likely should be quitting. And when I saw that, I said, okay, I guess it's all these biases and psychological facts that weigh that. But what about the value of the quit option? Because it's a one-way option and you can't unquit by and large. So doesn't that option to quit have some value that should play in that expected value calculation?
It should, if we were objective.
Right.
So I totally agree with you. If I were objective and I could calculate expected value, I would take into account the option value.
Right.
There's no question. Right. So if I felt it was close, I would examine the expected value of the other routes that I could take. And having the option to quit obviously would be included for me in that expected value, right? Being able to preserve the option value. The problem is that when we're calculating that expected value, we're not objective.
We don't have a lot of more time, but what I do want to get to one of the questions that is, my audience is very central to the people I talk to, which is the decision to stop working and retire, because that is a fundamental quit decision. And again, it's one of those things that, I guess there's this thing, well, I'll quit when I hit my number, when I get enough to retire. But that number just keeps
Nobody
getting
actually
bigger
does
and
that.
bigger, and you never retire.
No one does that.
So what do you say? What do you say to the people that are, in their 50s and thinking, maybe I'm getting tired. Maybe how do you approach that quit decision?
Yeah. So let me just say, first of all, there's something that I did not discuss in my book, because there's only so many things that you can discuss, which is there is a time element to quitting. What we can think about is that as we get closer to the end of a series, you should be more sticky.
Yes.
Okay. So the example would be, let's say you go on a vacation and it's a 7-day vacation. So 7 nights. So you're going to have 7 dinners. For the first 6 nights, it totally makes sense to go sample different restaurants. But on the 7th night, you should go back to the restaurant that you loved the most. So you should stop exploring new options. You should actually just go back to something that you already liked.
Right.
And that just has to do with sort of what is, when we're thinking about what the value of continuing to explore is and how much risk you want to take on. And that as you get closer to the end of a series, you should just be more sticky, and you should sort of, the best option should be what you kind of stick with. This translates to the sort of quitting jobs and things like that, which is that the closer to the end of your career you are, the more likely you should just stay in the job that you're in. So I think that part of the reason why when people are older, they're feeling that pressure of not wanting to walk away is that they're feeling that there's may not be another option out there for them. And so that's causing them to stick, which in some ways is rational.
Right.
Just because of this issue of you should stick with something that you already know as you're toward the end of a series.
Well, one of the things is I'm not going to have enough money, and that's where, the other challenge in retirement comes in is most people have to live on their money, and they've got a limited amount of time and a limited amount of money.
So we wanted twofold things. First of all, we want to discover, are you unhappy and do you actually want to retire? So that's that first deadline, right? How long would you be okay in this situation, regardless of anything else? What would be a bad version of the world that would tell you that it's time to walk away from your job? So we've got that set aside. But then now we have to think about a different runway, which is if you're planning now to retire, in other words, not find another job, we have to now look at the actuarial tables, right? How long do we expect you to live?
Right.
We know that the amount that you're going to spend isn't linear. It's going to drop if you're not traveling and so on and so forth, as you don't have expensive for your kids, whatever. We can think about long-term care, but we assume you'll have insurance for that, so on and so forth. Right. So we figure out,
right.
Sorry.
The truth is it's variable. I mean, what you spend in retirement is a random variable, and that's it's a gnarly problem. The decumulation problem. So, but it sounds like you're gonna create a lot more early retirees with your.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. So that's basically what we're trying to think about. Is so if we think about how long are you expected to live, right? That's going to be also, you have to think about what is your risk tolerance, right? If you are expecting to live to 85, are you willing to risk living to 95, right? So we have to understand that from you, right? So we can sort of figure that out. And then we can look at sort of, how, projecting from here, what's the amount of money that we think that you need? How much do you have in savings? How can we actually get there so that you can retire? So that creates a different type of deadline. And as you should be thinking about that somewhat early, in the same way that I would want someone to think about who's quitting a job, to think about that before they actually walk away, so that they're set and they have time to actually roll on to the next thing.
Wow. Annie, this is fantastic, because I think you've now changed my thinking a little bit in terms of how I think about retirement. I mean, not my own retirement, because I retired and unretired a couple times since.
Which, by the way, say that again, because that's something that I think that people need to understand, is that we think about quitting as last and final.
Right.
But in the same way that starting something isn't last and final, generally quitting something is also not last and final. So I think that that's another thing that we need to realize, that we forget, and it puts so much pressure on the decision when you think that if I quit, that's it.
Yeah.
Right. Never get to go back to anything. And you just said, I've retired and unretired and retired and unretired, because the fact is that it isn't generally a last and final decision.
Right. And so it's not really a one-way option in all circumstances. And I think that's maybe one of the key takeaways here. Annie,
look, if you divorce someone, it's hard to get married to them again, but people have done it.
They do. They do.
They have done it. So even that is not a one-way door.
Right. I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up here. And I just wanted to know, I mean, it's a fantastic book, and the book is Quit. And you've made quitting sound like a really good thing.
I hope so, because it is.
Yes. And what's next for you?
Can I just give one more shout out for the Alliance for Decision Education?
Sure,
I would really love for people to go visit that. It's a nonprofit that I co-founded. Yeah. So the way that what we say is, look, there's been all this wonderful work from people like Richard Thaler and Danny Kahneman and Katie Milkman and Angela Duckworth and Barry Staw and Colin Kammerer and Michael Mauboussin, all this work that's really focusing on adult decision making, right? How we're thinking about improving the way that adults make decisions. And we're saying, why aren't we teaching this to kids? Right? Like this should be in every school, K through 12. Why are we teaching them trigonometry?
Right.
What is that?
I think trigonometry is worth learning.
If you're going to be an engineer and you can learn it when you're older, why are we teaching it to middle schoolers? That's the question that we want to know. It feels like probably it would be better to teach them basic decision skills so that they can make better decisions, so they can decide whether they should take trigonometry if they want to be, for example, an engineer, or I don't know, sail the seas without a computer. So then you would definitely want to know trigonometry, or if you're raising a barn, those things would all be great for trigonometry. But the history of trigonometry, actually, I don't know if you know this, but the history of trigonometry was specifically designed because it doesn't feel much like it has a point. And so the idea was, if someone was willing to work hard enough to actually pass trigonometry, that would tell you something about their skills when we were sorting people into going to college or not. And I would say that that's sort of a bad thing to still have in the curriculum, and teaching just basic decision skills would be much better. Very happy to say that I'm going to miss some people, but Paul Slovic, Daniel Kahneman, Richard Thaler, Colin Kammerer, Michael Mauboussin, Katie Milkman, Phil Tetlock, Barb Mellers, they're all part of our advisory council. So they're into it too. And it's just, we have a mission to bring decision education to every child in the world. So that's what we're trying to do. I would love people to go check that out.
Well, it sounds extremely worthy, and I'm going to check it out and, get involved to the extent I have the bandwidth. And because, like I said, pretty much everything that you've been involved with, I feel is a good thing. So
thank you.
Thanks so much, Annie. It's been great to see you, and I hope to see you again real soon.
Well, I hope so, real soon. Maybe I'll get another book out in like a year, and then we can chat again, or before that.
Okay. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, Annie. What a great, you're full of amazing information. I actually work in the K-12 space quite often doing this work, so I'd like to continue that conversation and that list of amazing people. What a dinner party that would be, right? But well,
I've had dinner with those people. It is actually really amazing.
So Annie is the author of Quit, which Pete says is an extraordinary book by an extraordinary practical author who thinks like an actuary, and clearly that is true. So thank you to our audience. Thank you to Pete. This is Money Mountaineering with Peter Neuwirth. He asks, what is your future worth? I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, producer of the show. We will see you all next month. Thanks for watching.